Okay, so welcome back everybody after Pesach, and tonight we're having a special class. The studies in Exodus will begin again next week with Rabbi Turk, but tonight we're going to be doing an overview of the days between Passover and Shavuot. Okay, so first of all, these days as a unit have a name. But besides that, during this period, there are several special days, and as much as time allows, we're just going to do what I refer to as a lek and a shmek. Just a quick little overview. Okay, so first of all, let's get to the actual mitzvah in the Torah of Sefirat HaOmer. There are 50 days between Passover and Shavuot, 49 days between the second day of Passover and Shavuot, and there's a mitzvah in the Torah to count off those 49 days. Okay, let me get the exact location of it. Hold on a minute. Okay. Take a look in Leviticus 23:15. I'll give you the page in a minute. Yeah, it's on page 623.
You should then count 7 complete weeks.
Okay, you want to read a little louder?
Sure. You shall then count 7 complete weeks after the day following the Passover holiday, when you brought the HaOmer as a wave offering, until the day after the 7th week, when there will be a total of 50 days. On that 50th day, you may present new grain as a meal offering to God.
Okay. So before we get to the mitzvah of the counting that defines this period of the year, the Yemei HaOmer or Sefirat HaOmer, the counting of the HaOmer, let me just explain to you baseline what these sacrifices are all about. Okay, now, pretty much anyone who has cruised a frum neighborhood in the last decade or so sees the ubiquitous sign of Yashan.
I was just going to ask that.
Yashan in the bakeries, Yashan in the pizza shops, Yashan on the packaging of almost any grain product that you buy in a kosher grocery, cookies, pasta, crackers, right? Nasa mikemach Yashan. It's made from flour that is Yashan. What does Yashan mean? Okay? There are 2 words in Hebrew that describe old age. When you're talking about a human being, it's called a zaken, or in the case of a female, a zakena. When you're talking about produce, it's called Yashan. Yashan just means old. Now what does old mean? So here's the deal. They would plant wheat. I think most agrarian societies there's winter wheat and the spring wheat, but the more ancient agricultural practice was to plant in the fall or the early winter, especially in the Mediterranean countries where there was no real snow in the winter. It was a time that was suitable for planting, right? And then there would be harvesting going on, beginning from the springtime, the early spring, around Passover time. And it will continue through Shavuot. That's when the fruits, trees blossom and brought with the fruit. That's when the grains ripen and were harvested, and so on and so forth. Okay. So here's the deal. There are 2 communal sacrifices that are brought. One is brought on the second day of Shavuot, and that is called the HaOmer. The HaOmer is nothing more. The word HaOmer in Hebrew, it's like saying a peck. In English, it's a dry volume measurement, and that was the amount of barley grain that was brought as a communal meal offering. Okay, in the temple in Jerusalem, there are 2 kinds of offerings. There were animal sacrifices, and very broadly, there were a lot of other offerings too, but the 2 broadest categories are, there were meal offerings, and there were animal sacrifices. Okay, so an individual could bring a meal offering, and there were communal meal offerings too. By meal offerings, meal is like cornmeal, oatmeal, meal meaning flour. Flour. Okay? sacrifice offerings that came out of flour. So one of the communal meal offerings was this thing called the Korban HaOmer. It was unique in a lot of ways, but the main uniqueness was the grain that it came from. So one of the only two flour/meal offerings that came from barley and not from wheat. Okay? So you brought this Omer, this amount of barley, on behalf of all the Jewish people. What was its function? Its function was to be matir chadash, meaning all crops that had been planted and harvested since last year's similar offering was considered chadash, the new crop. When does the new crop become old? After the Omer is offered in the temple. Since the destruction of the temple, and we no longer have the sacrifice, the calendar date is what does it. The calendar date, in other words, it's no big deal to get Yasham today. It's no big deal to get Yasham for the next 3 months, because everything they're serving today was planted and was harvested before Passover. Right? It starts getting a little edgy, so to speak, towards the end of the summer, because then there's a spring crop. There's spring wheat also, and other grains, and so on and so forth. So that's when you need this supervision of kamach yashin. It's made from the old stuff. It was made, basically translated into our terminology, it means it was harvested before last year Pesach, before the first day of Pesach, second day of Pesach, last year. Okay, so that's one carbon. Another carbon was brought on the holiday of Shavuot. That was called the shtei lechem b'chag. It was called the 2 loaves of bread. Now, excuse me, not b'chag. B'chag means sukkos. Ba'atzeres on Shavuot. And that was also matir chadash. It was matir, the new crop. What's the difference? It sounds redundant. What do I need 2 different sacrifices to allow usage of the new crops? The answer is that what the function of the Omer that was brought on Passover allowed the new crops for private use, for private consumption. The function of the shtei lechem, the 2 loaves of bread that were brought on Shavuot, or I shouldn't say brought, they were offered on Shavuot. That nuance of difference, or what I'm just trying to be accurate here, is the shtei lechem that were offered on Shavuot, no part of them ever made it onto the altar, because they were baked chametz, they were baked leaven, and not allowed to put leaven on the altar. But nevertheless, they were considered an offering, and they were also matir. What were they matir? They were matir already for sacrificial use. In other words, a private citizen could eat bread and cookies and pasta and all of that stuff from all of the grains that were harvested and that were around before Passover for their own private use, including their matzah, the rest of Passover. But they could not bring it for an offering in the temple. They would still have to use stuff that was harvested before last year Pesach until Shavuot. Okay? That second offering on Shavuot is what allowed you to bring the new crop for your own individual, for that matter, communal meal offerings. Okay, confusing enough yet? Before we even get to Sefirat? Question, at least. You look like you had a question.
I was a little confused on it. So basically, the Pesach offering, the Omer offering,
which was on the second day of Pesach,
which was on the second day of Pesach, allowed for the individual to use for their own private use. So they can make their challah, well, actually Pesach.
Matzah, challah, cookies, whatever you're making, yeah.
But the one for sacrificial use, you couldn't use until you made the Shavuot offering.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. Okay? Good. You got it. You got it straight. Okay. So that's just, this really has nothing to do with the mitzvah of Sefirat HaOmer. This is just, I'm trying to familiarize you with the terms of Omer, and once we're talking about what the function of the carbon Omer was, just to give you a more complete picture, I spoke about the bookend offering that was brought on Shavuos. Okay. Now, what's Sefirat HaOmer? We have 2 mitzvahs. One of them that we just read here. Okay? You shall then count 7 complete weeks. Yeah?
No. It makes sense.
And then another verse says 50 days. Okay? There's yet another verse in the Torah that says Shiva Shavuos Tisbelucha Mehechel Kermesh Bakama. You should count for yourself 7 weeks from the beginning of when you lift the sickle over the grain standing in vertical stalks. Okay, that's another verse in the Torah. Bottom line is there are two parts, there are two component parts of this mitzvah. You've got to count days and you've got to count weeks. So, for those of us who are fulfilling the mitzvah of counting the HaOmer, or the HaOmer count properly, so for the first week after Pesach, and when I say after Pesach, I mean after the second night of Pesach, we're counting days. Today is day one in the HaOmer. Today is 2 days in the HaOmer. Parenthetically, the mitzvah is to count the ordinal and now cardinal numbers. You don't say this is the second day of the HaOmer or the fourth day of the HaOmer. Say this is 4 days in the HaOmer. Right? And when you get to the 7th day, then you go, right? Today is the 7th day, which is a week in the HaOmer. Right? When you get to the 10th day, you say today is 10 days, which is a week and 3 days in the HaOmer. Right? So in other words, the mitzvah is to count both days and weeks, which is pretty evident in the verses that we just read. Okay. But before I get to some of the most obvious halacha, the most obvious ritual law that applies during this period of the year between Passover and Shavuot, besides whatever kosher dietary regulation have to do with Chodesh Yoshin, is to do the count. Okay, every night, the word tmimos, shevish are complete weeks. The way you get complete weeks is, ideally, as soon as night falls, that's when you should be counting the HaOmer. The common custom, though, is to daven Myra first, to daven the evening prayer first, and then to count Sefirat HaOmer. And the reason for that is a pretty famous rule in Torah ritual law. In case you've never heard it before, you may as well become familiar with it again. Whenever a person has multiple mitzvahs to do, right, there are rules and regulations governing the sequence. Right. If I got a bunch of them in front of me, how do I know which one to do first? Maybe I should do some simultaneously. I don't know what to do. Okay, so one of the primary rules to sequencing mitzvahs is something called tada v'shena tada tada kaidim, which means when you have a frequent mitzvah and you have an irregular mitzvah, you do the frequent one first. So since the recitation of the Shema is something that applies 365 nights a year, whereas the counting of the HaOmer count only applies 49 nights a year, HaOmer is considered infrequent vis-a-vis relative to Shema. So we do Shema, and once you do Shema, you've got to do Shemona Esrei, aka the evening prayer service. Do the evening prayer service, then you count your HaOmer. Right? But in other words, in theory, if there would be no mitzvah to say Kriya Shema at night, if there would be no such mitzvah, and you could calculate the onset of night immediately, then the bells and whistles way to perform this mitzvah would be as soon as night falls, the second night falls, you count the HaOmer. But again, that's not what we call likuva, that's not something that makes or breaks the mitzvah, that's just ideal. Another thing that falls out of this word tamimos, that even people who have the custom to start Shabbos early, or to start Yontav early, or who take on the most lenient halachic opinion, and when the onset of night is, the first night of Shavuos, people tend to wait to start Ma'ariv pretty late, relative to what their norm is the rest of the year. And the reason for that is the other end of it. To be perfect, to be wholesome days, you want to start the count as early as possible, but you don't want to call the count over before night has definitely fallen on the 49th day. And the 50th day has for sure begun. So that's why people have a tendency to daven Ma'ariv late the first night of Shavuos. Okay. Sefirat HaOmer. All right, now let's go through, again, it's not supposed to really be a nitty-gritty halacha class. Let me share with you some of the ideas that the mitzvah philosophers have said about this mitzvah. So, really, I don't know, it sounds like it's almost a nickname. It's a Sefirat of the HaOmer. It has nothing really to do with the HaOmer. The HaOmer, the mitzvah of the HaOmer, two independent mitzvahs. You know, you bring the sacrifice on the second day of Shavuos. That's a communal mitzvah. It's not binding on any one individual. The mitzvah of counting is every single individual is supposed to count. Right? For just 1 second. Right? Nevertheless, since the marker, so to speak, the date on the calendar, which is the number 1 day of this count up, is the day when they sacrificed the HaOmer, so it's called Sefirat HaOmer. However, you're going to hear that most of the explanations that I give have really nothing to do with the HaOmer. Yes?
Severe,
Yeah.
What does that mean in English?
Counting.
It does mean counting.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I just
There are a lot of words in Lashon Kodesh in the Holy Tongue that have the etymological root of Samach Pei Reish. Okay, it could mean a book. It could mean a count. It could mean a story. It could mean a sapphire. You know, it has a lot of different meanings. But in this context, it means to count. Okay, so the most famous explanation for Sefirat HaOmer is the one that's given by the Ran, that is a Sefirat for Kabbalah Satorah. We know that Shavuot is the holiday that marks the historical event that happened on Shavuot was the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. So, in anticipation of the Torah being given on Mount Sinai, we do a count up of days. And the reason that he says, the Ran is sensitive to the fact, well, it's got a wrong name then. We should call it Sefirat HaTorah. We should call it Sefirat HaOmer. Right? He kind of hedges his answer on this. He says, look, the generation that left Egypt, which was the generation that actually did receive the Torah, okay, they also did Sefirat HaOmer. They did this mitzvah even though they couldn't bring an Omer. They hadn't harvested a crop. There was no temple in Israel yet. There was no Mishkan. There was no tabernacle in the for them to wander with through the desert. Even if a person wanted to bring a sacrifice, there was no way of bringing sacrifices. Okay, they brought a sacrifice. They brought the Paschal lamb the night of Exodus from Egypt. And that was an exception to the rule. No, every other sacrifice they couldn't do until they had a tabernacle. And nevertheless, they had Sefirat. Even though we call it Sefirat HaOmer, if you want to get to the roots of the mitzvah, the first time the mitzvah was performed, it was more of a count up to the receiving of the Torah than a count away from the bringing of the Omer, as it was in that first generation.
The counting of the Omer is a rabbinic?
No.
It's from the Torah.
Yeah, well, we just read the Pesachim on page 6 to 23. Yeah, it's right there in the Torah. You have to count days and you have to count weeks. Okay. He gives a beautiful mashal, the Ran, when he gives a parable, an allegory, to explain what the mitzvah, how the mitzvah Sefirat HaOmer works. He says there was once a nobleman who was in his carriage, and he's riding down the road, and he hears these shrieks, these cries, help, help, I'm trapped here, right? And he tells the coachman, stop, I want to see what's going on. And he looks on the side of the road, there's this deep dungeon, there's this deep pit over there, and there's somebody trapped in there. And he says, what's going on over here? He says, I know, I'm an innocent man, I've been incarcerated, please help, get me out of here. So he says, not only am I going to get you, I like you, you look like a fine man, not only am I going to get you out of here, okay, but I want you for a son-in-law, I have an eligible daughter, I'm going to marry my daughter. So, the guy is sitting there waiting in the pit, he's sitting there waiting in the dungeon, he says, yeah, right, talk is cheap, the guy probably had a nice bender last night, and he didn't know what he was looking at, and he keeps on making these promises he has no intention of keeping. Once the nobleman comes back, and he arranges for the jailbreak, he breaks the bars on top of the pit, he lowers a ladder down there, ropes, whatever it takes to get the guy out of the pit. He says, hey, maybe this guy's serious. He made good on the first promise, maybe he's going to make good on the second promise. When Moshe Rabbeinu had his vision at the burning bush, he kind of asked God, why do the Jews deserve to be liberated from Egypt? And God answered him, are you going to worship me on this mountain? The vision of the burning bush happened at Mount Sinai. You are going to receive the Torah. Not only am I going to take the Jews out of Egypt, but the point of taking them out of Egypt is that they should become Makabal Torah, should become people who can receive the Torah. Okay? That's the king's or the nobleman's daughter, so to speak. So once the Jews experienced Yetzias Mitzrayim, the next day they woke up and said, hey, second day of Pesach, God kept his promise, a promise keeper. He said he was going to take us out of Egypt. He said he was going to arrange for this massive jailbreak, and he did. So maybe this business about getting Torah min hashamayim, getting Torah from the heavens, descending Torah down from the heavens, and giving it to us, maybe that's not a fib either. So in anticipation, they start counting. So counting off the days in anticipation for getting this great gift of the Torah. The chinuch deals with another pretty obvious question. He says, my kids, even though they're bad at math, elementary school kids I'm talking about, they all have their calendars and all crossing off days on the calendars, and they know exactly 56 days left to school, 55 school days left, 53, right? We're accustomed to what's called a count down, not a count up. So he deals with this issue. If it's as the name would seem to imply, Sefirat HaOmer, I understand why it's an ascending order. It's an event that happened in the past. It happened already. We brought the HaOmer, and we're counting away from the HaOmer. But if it's about anticipating the giving of the Torah, he goes with the Shita, with the opinion of the Ran, that the Tama mitzvah, the reasoning behind this mitzvah, is an anticipation of giving the Torah. So, if that's the case, it ought to be a countdown. Day 1, meaning the second day of Passover, should be day 49. And as we get closer and closer to Shavuot, you say, okay, only 10 days left, only 8 days left, only 3 days left. That's how it should be counted. So he says something, I'm going to say it over, I'm not 100% clear about it myself. But basically what he says is that the pain of not having the Torah exceeds the joy of having the Torah. So because of that, I am looking backwards. I'm looking about all the days I'm done. All the days that, you're no longer in prison, but in a spiritual sense, in a certain sense, you're still in prison. So that explains why the count is, in a certain way, according to this shot, it's kind of backwards rather than forwards. Okay, the Abu Darham, one of the early commenters on the Siddur and the early Pesach, he says some much more pragmatic reasons for Sefirat HaOmer. He says that unlike the big holiday season with the high holidays, right, where 3 holidays bunched together, and even if there had not been a specific mitzvah pilgrimage in the Torah, a lot of people would want to be in the temple for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur anyway, just like in contemporary Judaism, we have our 3-day-a-year Jews. They never show their face in synagogue and temple the rest of the year. But comes Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, then every place is packed, right? So we don't have to worry so much about Jews making it for the real pilgrimage holiday, which is Sukkot. But when you're talking about Pesach, and then close on its heels, very soon on its heels, comes Shavuot, just 49 days later, and people, it's an agrarian society, people are busy harvesting, got a lot of other things on their mind. If we're not going to make a mitzvah out of counting the days, people might not be able to plan their pilgrimage to Jerusalem properly. Especially, don't forget, since many of these people were infantrymen, many of these people made the hike on foot. Hence, those 3 pilgrimage holidays are called in the Torah regalim, foot days, foot holidays. Right? The Muslims have something called hajjis, right? They go for the hajj, which incidentally, that's like the Hebrew word chag. Chag, with an Arabic pronunciation, becomes hajj. Now they go for the holiday, right? The ones who make the pilgrimage to Mecca are called hajjis. And lahavdol v'avdol, it's 1,000 degrees of separation. In Judaism, they're called olei regalim, those who ascended for the foot holidays. Okay, so you got to go, especially you got to go by foot. You got to budget enough time to make the walk, to make the hike, to make the trek. So that's why God instituted this mitzvah of counting up the days. You shall know where you're holding between Passover and Shavuot.
We don't count though from Shavuot to Rosh Hashanah, right?
No, I was anticipating that. That's why I said that there was no worry when you have those big holidays bunched together, where even absent the mitzvah of the Torah to make the pilgrimage, a lot of people want to be in Jerusalem anyway that time of the year. Then there was no mitzvah sphere. But here, Pesach, Shavuot, it's a short, compressed time, and it's harvest time, and people are very busy. We were worried if we didn't make them count the days, they might not budget enough time to make the pilgrimage for Shavuos.
And this is the only time on our calendar that we actually have a count.
Yes.
For the HaOmer, there's no
Yes.
other.
For a mass communal thing, this is the only time. There's something in the Jewish family purity laws, but that's something on an individual. That's not something on the entire nation. Okay. Another reason. What? Yeah.
At the end of the count,
Yeah.
50th day.
Yeah.
What is our responsibility that day?
To celebrate the holiday of Shavuos. You
And-
count 49 days, and then you have the holiday of Shavuos.
Right.
You want to know what Shavuos consists of? Shavuos is the only one of the major Jewish holidays that have no proactive mitzvah to it.
There's no,
There's no sukkah, there's no matzah, there's no blowing the shofar, there's no reading the Megillah, there's no giving gifts like on Hanukkah. It's only a yontiv
right.
in the passive way, in terms of that creative activity, aka malacha, working.
But
It's
no,
forbidden.
no mitzvah like we finally reached this day when
No.
Hashem gave us the Torah,
Right.
and we should on this day, besides celebrate, give tzedakah, give
No mitzvahs. There are plenty of customs.
Like
So-
second all night?
There are a lot of customs surrounding Shavuos, but there's no actual mitzvah. Okay.
the mitzvah is to be alive and celebrate.
That's the mitzvah. Okay, the Abu Dharam adds one more idea, and he said again a very pragmatic idea. This is a time, again, when you're talking about an agrarian society, this is a time of high anxiety. Think, April 12th for a CPA. Think, when it still existed, the last 3 days at a bash at Sims, for the wholesalers in the clothing industry, right? Every industry, you talk about, Black Friday, the time, for retailers between Thanksgiving and Xmas, right? Almost every industry has a period, some longer, some shorter, that make or break the year. This is it. This is when I turn my profit margin, right? This is, okay. Now, when you're dealing with it in an agrarian society, it's not just a question of how fat is my bottom line going to be this year, how big a bonus will I get. It's not a question of profit margin. It could be the difference between life and death. Right? A good crop, we can be satiated for the year. Bad crop, locusts descend, some kind of crop disease, starts spreading like wildfire. Too much wind, blow the kernels out. Too much rain, make everything soggy and then mildewy. There are a lot of things that go wrong during the harvest period. And the main harvest period is between Pesach and Shavuos. So, it's to add a religious element to the financial / existential anxiety. Okay? No, remember these 49 days when basically your success, livelihood, and again, in a certain sense, your very life is going to turn on what happens during these 49 days, and make it a time of teshuvah, of repentance, and of introspection. We know the real teshuvah season for the Jewish people starts the first day of the month of Elul and culminates 40 days later on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement. Nevertheless, this is also, according to Abu Dharam, another time of the year that's worthy of introspection and doing teshuvah, because, again, your life is riding on the success or failure of what happens during these 49 days. Okay. Now let's go. So far, I've told you, some of the more pragmatic mitzvah philosophers talk about. Now let me share with you things that the Jewish mystical tradition has to say. Again, there's days and there's weeks, and it's 7 times 7. Every week has 7 days, and every week has 7 days. And the count of the HaOmer is Shabbos, 7 complete weeks. Shabbos, Tamimos, Tiyano. 7 perfect, complete, wholesome weeks. 7 times 7 gives you 49. Okay? This is a theme that repeats itself elsewhere in the Torah. There are 49 days between the Exodus and the giving of the Torah at Sinai. There are 49 years in the Jubilee cycle. Right? So 49 has a significance. And let's start it this way. The Zohar Chadash says as follows. And I have to take his word for it. I didn't do a Google search on this. I didn't check this out. But he says that Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, is mentioned 50 times in the Torah. Some permutation. Okay? Remember that you were a slave in Egypt. Okay? I sanctified the Sabbath day in memory of Yetzias Mitzrayim. There are 50 such verses throughout the Torah. So he says as follows. What that means is the remez, the allusion on that facet of Torah called remez, hints, allusions. What the Torah is alluding to is to say that not one exodus from Egypt, there are 50 exodus from Egypt. One exodus from Egypt is the literal exodus from Egypt. Yeah? Big jailbreak, massive jailbreak, 2.5 million people busted out who were slaves before, who were slave labor force, they're gone. They left the country. That's on the physical / social / historical level. On the metaphysical level, on the spiritual level, the Hebrew slaves, the Jews, were enslaved to what's known as the Memtesh Sharei Tumah, 49 gates of impurity. 49 levels, 49 facets of impurity that permeated ancient Egyptian civilization and which the Jews, totally subsumed in Egyptian society, became contaminated with. So God had to take us out not just of the physical, historical place called Egypt, but out of this metaphysical bondage that we had, submerged and oppressed by 49 gates of impurity. We had to leave each one of those gates of impurity. Those are the other 49 places in the Torah where it says there was the Yetzias Mitzrayim. And each day, the progression was, after they physically left Egypt, they were psychologically, spiritually, metaphysically, however you want to call it, they were leaving Egypt a little bit more each day. Parenthetically, this helps address the question a little bit why it's a count up and not a count down. And I think it also speaks to the fact that it's ordinal numbers and not cardinal numbers, because we're talking about the cumulative effect. Talking about we now have 49 days, 49 gates of impurity that we left behind. And Zohar Chadash adds, for every gate of impurity that they left, they entered a gate of wisdom. / purity, I guess. But again, it was this cumulative wisdom that made them worthy, or made them, worthy was maybe not the right word, made them capable of receiving that ultimate gift of the mind, which is the Torah. Alright? So, the way this is reflected in the actual ritual observance is, there's certain things, and here I'm not on such, shaky ground. Usually whenever I say something over from a Hasidic master, I say, the official line of the Jewish Heritage Center is more the Muslim movement, not the Hasidic movement. I'm a little hedgy-madgy about it. But there's certain things in the Jewish mystical tradition that have gone mainstream. Even among the German Jews of Washington Heights, and you can't get more anti-mystical than them, everybody does Kabbalah Shabbos Friday night. Everybody does L'chadaidi. L'chadaidi is provenance. It's not an ancient part of the Siddur. It started with the Lurianic Kabbalistic school in Safed in the 16th century. It's not thousands of years old. It's 300-400 years old. And everybody does it now. It's universal. Somehow, certain things went mainstream. So, another thing that went mainstream is that every Siddur that I've ever seen published, even the Nusach Ashkenaz Siddur, things that they say in Washington Heights, things that they say in yeshivas and Young Israel's, very non-obscurantist approaches to Judaism, very rational approach to Judaism. But every Siddur, when it has Sefirat HaOmer, the mitzvah of counting the HaOmer, it has a little prayer that you say, and you talk about the tikkun of the midos, which is really what we call the tikkun of the spheres. According to Kabbalistic tradition, there are 10 emanations. I don't know how to translate spheres. Spheres, it's another word that the word sefer can mean. Okay? The first 3 relate to the intellect. Chachma, Bina, Das. Ever heard of it? It's an acronym for Chabad. We've all heard of Chabad, right? Those are the top 3 spheres. Because Chachma Bina Das mean wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. So that relates to the life of the mind. The bottom 7 spheres are called the Midos, because they relate to our emotional life rather than the life of the mind. And those spheres are Chabad b'chagas naim, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, kindness, might, splendor, Netzach, sometimes translates victory, sometimes translates eternity, Hod, beauty, Yesod, foundation, Malchus, kingdom. Those are the 7 spheres. Now, each week of Sefirat HaOmer, okay, we talk about tikkun, a repair, a metaphysical repair. We're not talking about marching for civil rights or saving the whales, okay, or hugging a tree. This tikkun that we're talking about is some kind of a metaphysical tikkun. There was a kilkel, there was some kind of disrepair, ruination that happened in these spheres, in these spheres / midos. Okay, we're not as kind and as altruistic as we should be. Our chesed needs repair. Yeah, we're not as mighty and courageous as we should be. Our gevura needs repair. Yeah, we're not as loyal to the Davidic dynasty or accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven as we should be. Our malchus, our kingdom needs repair. Whatever, all these are various midas. Some of them that dovetail very nicely into the regular ethical Muslim literature. Everyone can understand that chesed needs repair, right? And others that really, not what you would find in a regular Muslim book. It sounds a little bit more mystical. What is Tiferes? What does splendor mean? And if I'm not vainglorious, if I don't show off like a peacock, that's something that needs repair. Yeah, that's something that needs repair too. There's something called Tiferes, God's Tiferes, a human being's Tiferes, that needs repair too. So anyway, as you go through the 7 weeks and the 49 days of Sefirat HaOmer, you look in the Siddur, and you see every day is another tikkun, I'm repairing something else, and each week has its motif. The first 7 days are all about chesed. The second week is all about gvura. The third week is all about Tiferes. And each day of the week, you got the main motif and you've got the sub-motif. First day, I'm working on the chesed of chesed. All right? The last day of the first week, the 7th day of Omer, I'm working on the malchus of chesed. I'm repairing that. Okay? So everything is included in everything else. You don't have real tamimos, you don't have real wholesomeness, right? If you're a specialist, it's like, Popeye, gigantic forearms, and, the upper arms, look like toothpicks, look like Tinker Toys. You look grotesque, right? A person, it has to be symmetry, everything has to be worked out. So that's the idea of Chazon Ish writes, okay, so toggling back for a moment from mysticism to Mussar, Chazon Ish writes that he has a little bit of a critique on the standard Mussar farm in the way they quantify personal development. You open up a Sefer like Archas Tzadikim, right? So you have the chapter on haughtiness, you have the chapter on humility, you have the chapter on generosity, and the chapter on being stingy, and so on and so forth, right? He says what a person has to understand is this isn't a work for specialists. This isn't a work, I'm going to devote my life, to working on anger management. I can ignore everything else. It doesn't work that way. He says there's 2 midas, says the Chazon Ish. There's midah tova and there's midah ra. There's the good and the bad. Okay? And if you're bad in one department, it will spread like a cancer. You could have been working on anger management your whole life. But if you're haughty and you never did anything to rein in your haughtiness, you will lose your temper. And you'll be bad in every other department too. You need a holistic approach. You can be a master of one, but you have to be a jack of all trades. The basic idea is I want to be the maximum good. I want to be good in every department. It's not like I'm going to be Popeye, and work on my forearms and ignore the rest of my body in the gym. I need the total body workout, so to speak. I need the total soul workout also. So that's really the message of the way the Mekubalim, Jewish mystics, and like I said, it's made it into all the mainstream Siddurim. The real message of the 7 weeks and the 49 days is, I'm taking care of everything. There's a tikkun, there's going to be a repair for every permutation of every midah, for every mixture of a midah, for every, sometimes chesed comes before the Tiferes, comes before gevura, and sometimes gevura comes before chesed, and so on and so forth. However it is, whatever the sequencing is, I'm trying anyway to purify, fix, and repair everything. And again, this really speaks back to what the Zohar Chadash said, that each and every day of this 49-day count, working towards the revelation at Sinai, God is taking us out of one gate of impurity and installing us and gifting us a gate of wisdom. Question?
Okay. This has nothing to do with what you're talking about, but I think...
So if it doesn't, could we save it for after the class?
Okay.
Because I still have a lot to do. Okay. All right. The Sfas says, however, whatever pshat you want to take, whether from the mystics, from the Ran, anything that I've said up until now in the class, but obviously, the mitzvah of Sefirat HaOmer connects the two holidays of Passover and Shavuot. So he says, the Sfas that one of the ways to look at Sefirat is like one long intermediate days. We have something called Chol Shel Moed, right? On Pesach and on Sukkot, you have the bookends, the holidays at the beginning and the end, when you can't drive a car, when you can't write, when many of the malachas, many of the same things that are forbidden to do on Shabbos are forbidden on the holidays. And then you have what's called the week of the festival. It's like a middling kind of a thing. It's in between. It's not quite a weekday, but it's not quite a festival day either. A lot of people don't read. A lot of people just treat it like a weekday, and they don't realize that there are certain malachas, certain creative activities that you can't even do on Chol Shel Moed, right? But at any rate, a lot of people do celebrate it somewhat. They take off from work, they go on outings, they wear holiday clothes. A lot of ways that Baruch Hashem we do observe Chol Shel Moed. So Hashem says, when you understand in a certain sense that liberation from slavery and entering into a covenant with God, those are the two main motifs of Passover and Shavuot, are really connected. So then you look at these 49 days between Passover and Shavuot as one long Chol Hamoed. Basically what he's saying is, try to elevate your holiness, like you would on a real Chol Hamoed, like on the intermediate days between the first day of Pesach and the seventh day of Pesach, or between Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres. Now, paradoxically, okay, Chol Hamoed, it's a festival, I'm happy, right? I'm having good meals, I'm going on outings, or however I celebrate Chol Hamoed. Actually going on outings, not necessarily such a good idea, if you look into halachic books. But whatever.
What does it say? I'm sorry, what did you say? You're not good on non-halachic books? What is it? Not a good idea?
Going on outings on Chol Hamoed may not, certainly some of the outings may not be so halachically, but let's not go there. The bottom line is people treat them like holidays, right? Well, holidays and days of mourning seem to be contradictory. But leave it to us Jews who are capable of holy schizophrenia and multiple personality disorder. We're able to do both. On the one hand, yeah, it's a Chol Hamoed, I'm fixing everything and I'm leaving gates of impurity and so on and so forth. On the other hand, the days of Sefirat HaOmer are a decided downer. They are almost like, the 3 weeks or the 9 days during the summer, periods of national mourning. How did they come to be? How did the days of Sefirat HaOmer become days of national mourning? And they actually, again, let me talk about some of the halachas in which they manifest themselves. There are 33 days during the 49 period of Sefirat HaOmer where the custom is not to shave or take haircuts. Just like a person in mourning for their parents during the 30 days of mourning for your parents, you don't shave, you don't take a haircut. Okay? During those 33 days, people don't get married. You can get engaged, but you're not allowed to get married. Why? Getting married is a holiday. It's a personal holiday for the bride and groom and for the wedding party. You don't get married during those 33 days of Yom. When we bench Rosh Chodesh Iyar and Sivan, we're going to bless the new moon, the 2 months that the first day of the months appear during this 49-day period. The month coming up Iyar and the month of Shavuot is in Sivan. So unlike other times when we bless the new moon, you say Avarachimim. Avarachimim is like a Kel Malei Rachimim on a communal level. Something like a prayer for the dead. Right? So these are some of the halachic manifestations of the mourning, the low-level mourning that informs this time of the year. What's it all about? Why are we mourning? If it's a holiday, So where does the mourning come in? So there are 3 major tragedies in Jewish history that happened during this time of the year. First and foremost was the death of the 24,000 students, in a way the Talmud cryptically describes it, the 12,000 pairs of students of Rabbi Akiva. Why did these people die? And here's where the Musas farm go to town. It's a shleinagu kavod zebazeh. Didn't have proper respect for one another. They took each other lightly. So God said, here, I'm respecting you, I'm esteeming you. I got you out of slavery, I'm giving you my daughter's hand in marriage, as it were. I'm raising you to the highest level that any human beings since the fall of man have been raised to. I esteem you so highly, and you can't, especially B'nai Torah, especially Talmidei Chacham. You can imagine the students of Rabbi Akiva, right? What great Torah scholars they were in their own right. Right? They weren't street sweepers, these guys. They weren't garbage collectors. These were great scholars in their own right. And you're not treating each other with respect and esteem. A plague broke out. And they were dying, they were dropping like flies. Okay, it's an argument historically. If they died all throughout this period between Pesach and Shavuot, entire HaOmer, or if they stopped dying, if the plague stopped on the 33rd day of the HaOmer. But even according to the opinion that they died throughout the HaOmer, they still only died for 33 days, because they didn't die during any holidays. And you got 3 days of Rosh Chodesh between Sivan and Iyar. You got 7 days of Pesach is 10. And you have 7 Shabbos is 17. 50 minus 17, you're left with 33. So they're only dying for 33 days. And that's where you get the variant customs of, does the mourning stop at Lag BaOmer? Yeah. Does the mourning continue after Lag BaOmer? Lag BaOmer is just a break. Right? Everyone agrees they didn't die on the 33rd day of the Omer. And that's how that got to be a minor festival. And we do allow weddings, and we do allow haircuts on Lag BaOmer. What were the other two great historical tragedies that happened? The First Crusade, which the Hebrew word is Taf Nun Vav. We are now in Taf Shin Samach Beis, which is 772 of the 6th millennia, hence 5772. We're in the Hebrew year 5772. Okay? This is during the 5th millennia. The year is Taf Nun Vav, which is 866. Anyway, I did a little subtraction. I came out the year 1106 of the Common Era. Maybe I'm off. I don't know exactly. This you can Google very easily and find out. But around that time was the time of the First Crusade. Okay, and during the First Crusade, the Crusaders who were out to liberate the Holy Land from the Muslims, who then occupied it, but they figured, hey, listen, well, on the way down, we can get a few other infidels, and then with the Jews. And there were massive slaughters that went out through France, through the Rhineland, and what's today modern Germany. Okay, in particular, the three great Jewish communities that were wiped out. One of which was the hometown of Rashi, the illustrious Rashi, Worms, Ramaiza, we call it in Hebrew, and their kinnis, their elegies that we dirge on Tisha B'Av about these massive slaughters of Jewish communities. So that was another great tragedy that happened during this time of the year. And finally, in the 17th century, in 1648 and 1649, you had the Khmelnytsky massacres. And again, the vast majority of the martyrs of the Khmelnytsky massacres were slaughtered during Sefirat HaOmer, during this time of the year. So put all of those things together, and that's why there is an element of downerness to this time of the year. Okay. Like I said, a luck and a shmek. Let me just finish this up, and then I'll be happy to take questions. Okay, we're talking about all the days between Passover and Shavuot. I just gave you the overarching, all-encompassing, but now let's talk about individual days. Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, is a minor festival. And it's a minor festival for two reasons. One reason is that the students of Rabbi Akiva were not dying on that day. Another reason is because Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was dying on that day. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is, in a certain sense, the father of Jewish mysticism. But that would be doing him the service to limit him to being a great Jewish mystic. He's a Tana. He is one of the authors of the Mishnah. I'm sure you know that the Mishnah is a collaborative work. There were many rabbis whose Torah thoughts and halachic opinions are expressed in the Mishnah. The rabbis who lived during that period wrote, created, taught Torah during that time period are known as Tanoim, and the single individual is called a Tana. Rabbi Akiva was a Tana, Rabbi Yehuda Nasser, Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. A lot of the people read about in the Haggadah, they're all Tanaim. Reb Shimon, wherever it says just the words Reb Shimon, Rabbi Simon, throughout the Talmud, throughout the Mishnah, without explication, without saying son of this one, son of that one, Stam Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Wherever it says Reb Shimon in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, it means this man I'm about to talk about. So, if you open up the Mishnah, every third Mishnah, you got a halachic opinion from Reb Shimon. So it's not like he was only a mystic, some spook who had nothing, meat and potatoes to contribute. He was a great halachist as well, but he was the father of Jewish mysticism in as much as he wrote a book called the Sefer HaZohar, the Book of Splendor, which is to later mystical scholarship what the Talmud is to later halakha. So it starts from there. If you're not talking about the written Torah, if you're looking for the oral Torah, the departure point is the Book of Splendor from Shimon Bar Yochai. Anyway, from Shimon Bar Yochai's yahrzeit, or Hilula as it's known, the day of his ascent to heaven was on the 33rd day of HaOmer. We traditionally know his burial site. His burial site is in the Galilean city of Meron. The later Jewish mystics chose Tzfas, Safed, as their center because you could see Meron from Safed. That's the etymology of the name. Tzvat in Hebrew means to be tzofet, to be able to look. As Mount Scopus is called Harat Sofim, the lookout mountain, you can look from Tzvat and see Meron. They do their inspiration from Meron. At any rate, what?
I said I may be there and I may not be there. I don't know.
Okay.
What it says.
All right, you have to look on your itinerary.
Yeah.
I know that the Ministry of Tourism is trying to make it a more tourist-friendly place. They're trying to install a cable car up to the top of the mountain, whatever. But it's for religious tourists. It's one of the can't-miss spots in Israel, certainly in northern Israel. At any rate, so on Lag BaOmer, there's a section of the Zohar called the Idra Rabbah, which I think means the great cloak or something like that, which is the Torah that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai revealed on the day of his death and was transcribed by his Boswells, by his students who were present. Suffice it to say, any similarity between me and a real Jewish mystic is purely coincidental, but the basic idea is that since this was the day of his death, his soul was more empowered. It was the day when his soul was going to shock its mortal coil, as it were, that in a certain sense keeps blinders on our eyes and filters on our eyes from seeing what's going on in the metaphysical world. So he was losing that already, Rav Shimon. So he revealed secrets, mystical secrets of the Torah on that day, greater than all the other days of his life, even though it was only one day. So that's why anyone who's influenced by a Jewish mystical tradition considers Lag BaOmer a big day, an important, significant day, but a tremendously happy day. It's almost like a mini Shavuot. It's like a mini Matan Torah. Okay, it's a Matan Torah of the mystical tradition, so to speak. So roll that all together, and that explains why the laws of mourning are suspended for Lag BaOmer. Okay, just very quickly, let me go over a few other. I'm not even going to go into the customs of Lag BaOmer, other than the halachic thing that you can cut your hair and you can get married on that day. Okay, there's a custom this coming Shabbos for those people who bake their own challahs, and maybe it's even available in some of the commercial bakeries, something called a shlisel challah, a ki challah. What's a ki challah? Some people spread an arrangement of sesame or poppy seeds on top of the challah in the shape of a ki. Others actually bake a ki into the dough of the challah. And this is supposed to be, again, because in an agrarian society, these are weeks that unlock the parnasa, the sustenance, the livelihood for the whole year. So it's supposed to be a good omen, a good portent, that God should unlock the gates of parnasa, and that we should have plenty to eat, and whatever else our financial needs are for the year. So some people have a custom in the shlisel challah. Okay. Okay, I will mention one of the custom of Lag BaOmer before I move into Siva. Lag BaOmer, there was a custom, and when I was a kid, it was really prevalent. I don't know how prevalent it is now. People do archery on Lag BaOmer. Okay, when I was a kid in elementary school, it was a field trip day. They would take us down to the public park. They would, nowadays, most of the kids, they rent a diamond for the kids and they have a baseball game on Lag BaOmer. When I was a kid growing up, they would provide us with those little dime stores, suction, rubber cups, bows and arrows, and we would shoot. We didn't know what we were doing. We shot them at each other. We broke them. Broke them after 5 shots. But there was such a custom to do archery on Lag BaOmer. And the reason that the Jewish mystical tradition teaches us is as follows: during the entire lifetime of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, no rainbows ever appeared. Now, you were with Rabbi Turk for the book of Genesis. According to the Bible, not according to meteorologists. Why do we have rainbows? What are rainbows all about?
That Hashem, say it does, so we won't have another flood.
Right, it's a sign of a covenant that there'll never be a flood. Okay. But, in a certain sense, on the one hand, well, great, I'm glad that there's a covenant, there won't be another flood. On the other hand, I'm a little bit scared that God had to pull out the sign of the covenant. Obviously, he's upset, he's tempted to make another flood. But sometimes there's such supernal, transcendent, saintly people that as long as they're here in the world, so to speak, kaviyachol, God's in a good mood. He never has that temptation of, forget it. Let's wipe this all out and start from square one again. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's lifetime was one such period in human history. And that is why our tradition teaches us that for the entire lifetime of Shimon Bar Yochai, no rainbows appeared. On the day that he died, a rainbow did appear. So whether or not on any individual Lag BaOmer we do have a cloudy day, we do have conditions for rainbows or not, to be reminiscent of the actual day of the death of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai when a rainbow appeared. So that's where the custom of bows, I don't know about the arrows so much, there's going to be arrows, but what's the point of a bow without an arrow, I guess, right? So that's where that custom came from. Okay. The 20th day of the month of Iyar is a significant day as well, because the 20th day of the month of Iyar, when the Jews came out of Egypt, was the first time when the Jews were organized into 4 tribal camps composed of 3 tribes apiece. It was really the invention of tricolor flags, tricolor banners. Every camp of the 4 camps of Israel had a tricolor banner that reflected their gemstone in the breastplate of the high priest. They had a coat of arms, according to some authorities. They had psukim, they had slogans written on, but certainly the tricolor banner, that's clear in all the Talmudic and Midrashic sources. It started then. And this whole idea of traveling in that way, camped out, and camping in that way, they traveled in formation. When they camped in formation, is very significant because it's supposed to be reminiscent of the way the myriads of angels on high, the way they travel with God, as it were. So it's a very great compliment to the Jewish people that they're traveling in an angelic kind of a way, and that's the historical significance of Chaf Iyar, the 20th day of the month of Iyar.
What, 20th day
of the month of Iyar?
Oh.
Not a Winnie the Pooh character, a Hebrew month, Iyar. That's the month that's coming up now, Sunday and Monday. Okay? Finally, we have in the month of Sivan. Okay, we're supposed to be doing all the days between Pesach and Shavuot. In the month of Sivan, you've got obviously Rosh Chodesh Sivan, the first day of the month of Sivan. That's a holiday. Then days 3, 4, and 5 are called the Shloshes Yemei Hagbala, the 3 days when, prior to the revelation at Sinai, the mountain was cordoned off, hence the word Hagbala. Hagbala means a boundary. Okay, if you remember the narrative, I don't know if you haven't learned it yet, Rabbi Turk, right? You're not up to Parshas Yisro yet, you're not up to revelation at Sinai, but there were 3 days where Moshe Rabbeinu was told to command the Jewish people that you got to prepare, you have to be in a very state of high purity and high alert for the revelation at Sinai. And one of the things was, understand that when I reveal myself on Mount Sinai, there are going to be different stations for different people. Only Moses makes it to the summit of the mountain, and there's a little bit station lower for Aaron, a little bit station lower for his 2 eldest sons, Nadav and Avihu, another station for the 70 elders of Israel, and then everybody else at the foot of the mountain, and nobody should dare try to ascend the mountain, rise up on the mountain. So cordoning off and getting ready, the practice drills for this are called the Shloshes Magbala, the 3 days of boundaries of cordoning off. In between Rosh Chodesh and these 3 days, there's one more day that has significance, and it's called the Yom HaMiyuchas, which really means the day with a big lineage. What happened on that day? Why is it a day with a big lineage? Okay, so you've got...
What day is that now?
Not 2 Sivan. Calendar date 2 Sivan.
Oh.
Okay, the day after Rosh Chodesh and the day preceding the 3 days of cordoning off the mountain. So take a look in your Chumashim. Got the Chumashim open here anyway. Let's use them. Open up your Chumashim. Page 349. Mitch, read on page 349, verses 4 and 5.
Verses 4 and 5.
Chapter 19, verse
You
4 and
saw?
5. Yes.
You saw what I did in Egypt, carrying you on eagle's wings and bringing you to me. Now if you obey me and keep my covenant, you shall be my special treasure among the nations, even though all the world is mine.
Keep on going. Read verse 6 too.
You will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation to me. These are the words that you must relate to the Israelites.
Okay. There's 2 parts of the Torah. There's, whenever we read from the Torah, we make a bracha that goes like this. Asher bachar bana mikol ho'amim v'nasan lanu es Torah, who chose us from among all the nations and who gave us the Torah. So, the giving of the Torah, that happens on 6 Nisan. The choosing us from among all the nations is this. These words. You will be for me a priestly nation, a convocation. You will be a king of priests and a holy nation. Mamlechas Kohanim v'Goy Kadesh. Okay, this was part of Moshe ben Shuttle diplomacy. All of the days of Sivan, he's running up and down the mountain, carrying messages back and forth from God to the Jewish people. On the 2nd day of Sivan, that's when we got our yichus, so to speak. That's when we got our provenance, a special lineage. We're different. We're a different nation. We're a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, holy convocation. Hence the day took the name, the day of lineage. So those are the special days, ladies and gentlemen, between Pesach and Shavuot. The general period of the year is called Sefirat HaOmer, and I think I've given you a little bit of a brief overview of all the special days that occur then. Okay, I'm perfectly willing to take questions then. Should I be preserving this for posterity or not?
My question has nothing to do with
Okay, so if that's the case,